The first time Mrs. Ellis died, no one thought it was murder. They called it a blessing. She had been old, frail, lucky to go so peacefully, the neighbors said, pressing gloved hands to their mouths in soft admiration of the gentle doctor who had been by her side at the end. Dr. Harold Shipman nodded modestly at the funeral, his expression perfectly composed. He stood slightly apart from the grieving family, like a quiet guardian who had simply done his duty. And then another patient died, and another. Always at home, always sudden, always when he was there. He preferred the intimacy of house calls. Unlike other doctors who encouraged clinic visits, he arrived at front doors. He stepped inside private spaces thick with memory, floral wallpaper, framed wedding portraits faded at the edges, the faint scent of furniture polish and old books. He blended into these settings seamlessly, as though he belonged there. He listened attentively, asked measured questions, pressed his stethoscope against thin chests, and nodded thoughtfully. His demeanor never rushed. He projected patience, control, competence. For many of his elderly patients, he represented stability. Medicine can be frightening. Test results, hospital corridors, unfamiliar specialists. But Shipman was local, familiar. He knew their histories without glancing at files. He spoke in calm, reassuring tones that softened fear. Then, at a moment invisible to everyone else, he would draw a syringe. Diamorphine. Administered in a dose far beyond necessity, it worked swiftly. Muscles relaxed, breathing slowed, consciousness receded into a heavy stillness. There was rarely struggle. The victims trusted the hand that delivered the injection. Some may have believed they were receiving treatment for pain or anxiety. The silence afterward was almost gentle. He sometimes remained for several minutes, watching, ensuring the stillness was permanent. Occasionally, he adjusted the scene, positioning a body upright in a chair, tidying a blanket, placing spectacles neatly on a side table. The result looked like a peaceful passing, the kind families described with sad gratitude. When relatives arrived, he often delivered the news himself, his voice lowered appropriately, his face arranged into solemn sympathy. He would explain that it had been quick, merciful, there had been no suffering. And who would question that? He completed death certificates with steady precision. Heart failure, stroke, natural causes. In an aging population, these explanations did not invite scrutiny. Elderly patients die. It is an expected, though painful, reality. But numbers accumulate even when grief obscures them. Funeral directors began to notice frequency, entire weeks filled with services connected to the same physician. It was not dramatic enough to alarm immediately, merely unusual. Still, patterns linger in the mind. Colleagues observed quietly that his mortality rate appeared higher than average. Yet, medicine is unpredictable. Some doctors inherit sicker patient lists than others. Statistics can mislead when stripped of context, and so doubt hesitated. Shipman's control extended beyond the act itself. He maintained meticulous medical records. After a patient's death, he sometimes altered computer entries, adding symptoms retrospectively to support the cause of death he intended to certify. A complaint of chest pain inserted here, a note about breathlessness added there. To an outside observer reviewing files, the progression appeared logical. The illusion was subtle but deliberate. By the late 1990s, concern sharpened. A local doctor raised questions about the number of cremation forms Shipman signed without independent oversight. At the time, Britain's system relied heavily on professional trust. A doctor could certify a death and authorize cremation with minimal cross-checking. It was efficient and dangerously vulnerable. Police conducted preliminary inquiries, but evidence was thin. Many bodies had been cremated. Families expressed no suspicion. Without toxicology, there was no obvious crime scene. Still, statistics pressed forward. Shipman's patients were dying at rates far exceeding regional averages. The timing was also peculiar. Many deaths occurred in the afternoon, often after he had visited alone. Many victims were women over 75 who had not been terminally ill. Exhumations changed everything. Toxicology reports identified lethal levels of diamorphine in multiple bodies. Not marginal excess, not misjudgment, overwhelming doses inconsistent with legitimate treatment. The calm facade cracked. When Shipman was arrested in 1998, disbelief rippled through Hyde. Some patients defended him publicly. They described his dedication, his kindness, his attentiveness. To accept his guilt required confronting an unbearable truth, that trust had been weaponized. The trial in 2000 unfolded methodically. Prosecutors presented medical records, forensic analyses, computer data showing altered entries. They demonstrated how Shipman's access to vulnerable patients and authority over certification created near-perfect concealment. One case stood out starkly: the forged will of former Mayor Kathleen Grundy. The document named Shipman as a beneficiary of a substantial sum. Typed neatly, devoid of handwriting, it aroused suspicion among relatives. Forensic examination confirmed forgery. This evidence suggested motive beyond compulsion. He was convicted of 15 murders and 1 count of forgery, though a subsequent public investigation would conclude that the true number of victims likely exceeded 200. Psychological analyses later attempted to unravel motive. Some experts proposed a need for dominance, an assertion of ultimate control. Others suggested resentment, narcissism, or an internal narrative that rationalized killing as a form of mercy. Yet the diversity of victims, some not gravely ill, complicates any simple explanation. His earlier career contained warning signs. In the 1970s, he had been convicted of forging prescriptions for pethidine, an opioid. He was fined and entered rehabilitation. Afterwards, he resumed practice. The incident did not permanently derail his career. Instead, he built a reputation for competence. At home, he lived a conventional life: a family, a tidy house, neighbors who saw nothing unusual beyond quiet privacy. Courtroom scenes during sentencing were subdued rather than explosive. There were too many stories for spectacle. Each family carried private devastation: birthdays uncelebrated, empty chairs at holiday tables, unanswered questions. Shipman himself remained impassive. His expression rarely betrayed emotion. No comprehensive confession emerged, no clear articulation of motive. Silence persisted. In 2004, he died in prison by suicide, taking many answers with him.